And we're still active in the community. So, and more than that, knowing Nancy and having her think well enough of me that she would accept my invitation really means a lot. But I did it not because Nancy is someone that I've known since I first began graduate school, after I got out of service, but because the work that she's been doing is, I think, of vital interest to all of us, not just because of the work we do in employment and labor relations from our various perspectives, but as members of the American community writ large. And the work she's done is very original methodologically, and I think it says a lot about the current state of opportunity for different members of our society, and how those constraints and limitations, but also resources that provide for opportunity, are differentially allocated to people, independent of some other sense of merit. And I think that's why her most recent book, which you selling to you to the conference discount, I think it's really a book that you may want to pick up. But why it has received so much media attention, both on the radio and TV, but also in the press, in the print press. And so it really encouraged me a lot to know that she would come and share some of the insights and understanding that she's gained as a result of this most recent research. And so anything more I would say would detract from what she has to share with us tonight. So please let's welcome Dr. Nancy DiTomaso from Rutgers University.
Thank you. I did take the liberty to leave on the table some flyers regarding the book that does have a discount on it if you happen to be interested. And this is the book if anyone wants to see the physical copy. Thank Bill very much for inviting me and having the opportunity to come talk about this work, which I've been working on almost as long as I've known Bill. Not quite, but I actually started trying to figure out what this research was about in about 1993. So it's been a good 20 years. I want to start just a tad before my slides start to tell you why I got interested in this and what it is that I'm trying to understand and do. And maybe I'll start, as the preface of my book does, with a little bit about my background, because Bill and I were just talking about it. I grew up in Ohio, Northeast Ohio. I was a working class kid in a family where no one had ever gone to college. My parents were both steel workers, and I realized at some point in my life, my mother, my father, my uncle, my cousins, my brother-in-law, and my brother all worked at the steel company in one capacity or another. And when I got out of high school, I was actually hired as a secretary in that firm. And when I left that job to go to Ohio State to see if I could finish my undergraduate degree, my parents thought I was doing the most foolish thing in the world to leave a company like that, where if you left that job, the company policy was you could never go back. Because growing out of the war years, they didn't want you to take the company for granted. So I was giving up like the best job I was ever going to have to go off to college, which my parents had no idea what that meant. So from a very young age, I was always very interested in issues of inequality. And as I finished my doctorate, which happens to be in sociology with Bill, and went to my first, second, third job, I continued my interest in inequality, but I actually had the fortuitous experience at the timing of my interest in race, gender, and class inequality to move into a business school just as the issue of diversity in the labor force began to be of interest. So I began teaching courses on diversity in the labor force and thought that I would bring all this great sociological knowledge about the issues of inequality to talking about issues of diversity, and that all my students were going to be wowed by learning all these kinds of things. And what I found, of course, is that it made no impact at all, that talking about differences in access to education and to jobs and to pay and job segregation and all those kinds of things really didn't have an impact on my students at all, by the way, who were mostly MBA students at the time, master's students. They were mostly white. And I was teaching these courses, and at the time also very involved with and attending a lot of conferences and events with diversity consultants. And I felt that what was being done on the issue of diversity was somehow lacking a major component, because a lot of the stuff that I was attending, becoming familiar with, was all about how everything would be fine if we just stopped being prejudiced. And I kept saying, no, that doesn't seem quite the right kind of solution. And that's why I thought, well, if I bring all this stuff about inequality and people understand what the situation is, that somebody would rise up to the occasion and everything would change. But what happened was that in my classes, I began to realize that there was a profile of the students that kind of got me to this issue of what I didn't understand and was trying to understand in terms of trying to figure out how do you deal with the issues of inequality. And I did find in the work that I was doing that it was really racial inequality that had the most resonance and salience. Not so much gender, not so much class, not among the students that I talked to, but there was racial inequality that seemed to be the most challenging to address, both in conversation. But the profile in my classes, when I would try and talk about all these issues about income, education, jobs, and such, was that everybody in my class was with me. Nobody thought there was an issue, because they all believed in civil rights. They all believed in equal opportunity. Nobody discriminated. Everybody was nice. So I kept saying, what is the issue here? How is it that we continue to have racial inequality when there are no racists? Because nobody in my class was a racist, right? Everybody believed in everything I was trying to promote and talk about. And so that's where I kind of began this research, trying to understand, as the title says, how is it you can have racial inequality when you have no racists? And so my first step, back in 1993 or even before, when I was trying to figure out what this research was about, was to, like everybody, every academic, sort of survey the literature and read everything I could read across different disciplines. Sociology and psychology and anthropology and history and political science and public health, everything I could find. And I realized that there was two things that were very important in that exploration. One was that none of these fields talked to